Have you ever seen something that didn't make sense and you couldn't believe it, so you looked into it deeper to prove it wrong? But the more you looked into it, the weirder it got. Welcome to the last 10 years of my life.
And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
This is where it all started for me.
President Obama is related to all but one U.S. president.
First we start off with George Washington at the top, and then it goes to John Adams, Thomas Jefferson.
11-year-old Bridget Davigno says she's made a first-of-its-kind discovery that President Obama and all the presidents before him, with the exception of one, are related and descendants of a former king of England.
They are all cousins, and they're grandsons of John Michael.
Davigno says she spent countless hours on the internet over the summer researching the lineage of our presidents, a project that started with her trying to trace her own family tree.
But I'm the first historian to do all the presidents.
So who is the one that President Barack Obama is not related to? Martin Van Buren, 8th President of the United States, first U.S. president born in the U.S.
George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Emerson, John Tyler, James Polk, Zachary Taylor, Willard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison. Grover Cleveland again, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, William Taft, Woodrow Wilson, Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Aaron Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George H. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump. These are the presidents of the USA, from George Washington until today.
Speaking of George Washington,
because he's touted as such a man of integrity. Matter of fact, there's records that he attended church regularly, a Christian church. There's also records that he and his pastor, there's letters that have been written. Matter of fact, Library of Congress is a prime field to be picking truthful pieces of fruit. You want to get fruitful research? Hey, go to the Library of Congress. What we find out is that the pastor, one of Washington's pastors, he said that overall he spoke with Washington time and time again that Washington was a deist.
monotheism. The term monotheism comes from the Greek monos, meaning one, and theos, God. Thus, monotheism is the belief in the existence of a single God. Monotheism is typically contrasted with polytheism, which is a belief in many gods, and atheism, which is an absence of belief in any gods. Deism is a form of monotheism, the worship of one God. In addition to adopting the beliefs of general monotheism, deists also adopt the belief that the single existing God is personal in nature and transcendent from the created universe. However, they reject the belief, common among monotheists in the West, that this God is immanent, presently active in the created universe.
He wanted to continue going to the church because it was a political move, but in reality, Washington said he was a deist. They went back and forth on this matter. This has been documented historically. He was not a Christian. He was definitely a deist. Now, others will argue that Washington renounced the Masonic Lodge. Well, that's only a half-truth. Okay, he renounced the British Lodge. See, when he came over and started setting things up, like in this new era, if you will, he had to renounce the old to become part of the new. And so he was actually part of the Alexandrian Lodge. If you Google this, you're going to find out exactly which lodge Washington was a part of in Virginia. He renounced the British, joined on with the current lodge that was setting up in the New World. They were two separate systems. Now, they were very similar, but they were separate.
As far as the 1776 experiment, it wasn't Christian.
The definition of apotheosis is the exaltation of a subject to a divine level. It was painted by an artist called Constantino Brumidi, His story is interesting because in his younger years, he became famous for his paintings commissioned by the Vatican. In 1848, there was a Masonic attempt to overthrow the power of the Pope, and although it was ultimately unsuccessful, this guy who made a living painting for the Vatican, Brumidi, was surprisingly found to be one of the guilty chief conspirators. After that, he was shipped off to the USA, and there he made a name for himself by working for occult societies. It was he who painted this painting, which creates a kind of Masonic mirror image to the Vatican. So who are they exalting to a divine level here? Well, if we look closer, we see that it's the same man who stands under the dome, George Washington. Look at the bottom and you'll see the goddess Columbia, or Asherah, and then George Washington is depicted directly above her. It represents the deification of the man, George Washington. Note the pose he is striking with his left arm raised and his right hand extended outwards. He was depicted in a similar manner when this statue was commissioned. Now this statue is again elevating Washington to a position of God, as it was modelled on Zeus. It was meant to go on display at the Capitol, but after it was found to make people uncomfortable, it was moved to the Smithsonian Museum instead. What is extraordinary is that this pose is more commonly associated with Baphomet, the horned goat god that represents Satan. So if the painting intends to elevate the man Washington to the level of a god, we are forced to ask the question, what kind of god?
You know, it is not our desire to vilify anyone. Certainly Washington and many of the founding fathers, even that were not believers. It doesn't do justice to truth or reality or to God to try to paint them as something that they are not.
Their idea was to come and set up a government here that was almost identical to the oligarchy that they left. See, most people don't realize that. They don't realize that Washington was part of a grand conspiracy to create basically a new oligarchy here, a government controlled by a few, and that's all historical. We document that in our film. But the idea was to set that up, but to give more freedoms. But it still allowed the elite to run everything that the government wants. Any move of the government, the elite were going to be involved. They were not going to allow the common man to make decisions. Matter of fact, when the Constitution and some of the founding documents were signed, those windows were locked. You know, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis from the Pentagon, he came on record and he talked to us about this for the film. He points to the fact that the founding fathers were deep state.
An intentional trajectory to fulfill what famous Freemason Manly P. Hall described as the secret destiny of America, which includes a future national and global subservience to the god of Freemasonry, a deity that most Americans would not imagine when reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to one nation under God. In fact, the idea by some that the United States was established as a monotheistic Christian nation by those who designed Washington, D.C., and that the God referred to on American currency as a Judeo-Christian one, it's really a puzzling conclusion when reflected against the deistic beliefs of so many of the founding fathers, as you can see perpetually viewed in the so-called supreme architect deism of Freemasons and in the supreme judge of the world and the divine providence notations that are in the Declaration of Independence and other founding documents, as well as the countless pagan icons that actually dominate the symbols, the statues, the buildings, the seals that were carefully drafted under official government auspices, the Great Seal of the United States primary among them, which Manly P. Hall, the famous Freemason, rightly called the signature of that exalted body of Masons who designed America for what he called a peculiar and particular purpose. It all bears rich symbolism, forecasting anything but Christianity. As a matter of fact, when Christians in the 1800s argued that a hypothetical annihilation of the United States would lead to antiquaries of succeeding centuries, and by that they meant historians, concluding that America had been a heathen nation based on the symbolism of the Great Seal, Congress was pushed to create something reflecting the Christian faith of so many of its citizens. U.S. President and Freemason Theodore Roosevelt, he strongly opposed this idea, but other Masons weren't as frustrated with the plan because, given the ambivalence of the term God and the axiom that interpreted within the context of the Great Seal's symbolism, this certainly would not infer the biblical Christian God. Therefore, the slogan "In God We Trust," whoever you believe that God is, was accommodated by Masons and other Illuminatis who therefore approved as the official U.S. motto the phrase "In God We Trust."
The most dangerous weapon is information. It was rumored that the Nazis near the end of World War II were doing research on the minds and behaviors of humans, and that the secrets and answers to that research lied in the German scientists themselves. Countries such as China, the Soviet Union, and, through the mission codenamed Operation Paperclip, even the United States took former German scientists and engineers back to their own individual countries. The United States was terrified by this. The thought of communist countries researching and developing mind control methods was the worst thing imaginable. The idea of being able to brainwash your citizens, or anyone, into believing in the communist agenda, or any agenda for that matter, is an extreme power. Of course, the solution to this is to just beat the other side to the finish line. And that's exactly what the United States government attempted to do. Mainly, the CIA. The CIA was created in September of 1947, just a little over 2 years after the end of World War II. The goal? Gather intelligence, information from both domestic and foreign entities. In a 1951 CIA memo, it expressed the need to explore scientific methods for controlling the minds of individuals. The concerns of a Cold War world run by new Soviet mind control and brainwashing technology was an actual and genuine fear of the United States. Seriously, in an early 1950 CIA document, it states, hypnotism appears to have been used in some cases by the Soviets. It has the possibilities of lowering resistance against telling the truth, while also being able to induce specific action or behavior in a subject. It is possible for a skilled Russian operator to bring about an interrogation, yet leave the subject with no specific recollection of having been interrogated. The leverage you have for having this kind of power over other humans, whether they be spies, prisoners of war, or even normal citizens, is almost unrivaled. The thing is, this isn't fiction. This isn't some made-up conspiracy theory. There are confirmed facts. In the mid to late 1970s, over 20,000 CIA documents were released regarding the United States' most illegal undertaking. This is the story of how a single government agency planned and attempted to control and alter the minds of those who inhabited the country that they run. How the United States government attempted to develop psychological, biological, and radiological weapons to turn both foreign and domestic spies into sleeper agents, and how it could still be going on today. This is Project MKUltra. And thus, Project MKUltra was born. But MKUltra wasn't just one single project. Look at it as a web of experiments that were all interconnected with one ultimate goal: control. Project Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Search, and MK Naomi are just to name a few. But it goes much, much further. Although it started earlier, MKUltra was officially signed and begun in 1953 under CIA Director Allen Dulles. It was one of the largest projects ever known. Over 150 subprojects were created and handled by over 80 different institutions, universities, prisons, pharmaceutical companies, all of which you had little to no idea that they were doing work directly for the CIA. However, that didn't stop some of the most creative experiments from taking place. Many of these, as you might imagine, were very, very illegal. American as well as Canadian citizens were unknowingly and unwillingly tested on.
The cognitive processes of the human brain are really quite simple, and if you understand how they work, you can make entire populations think and decide the manner in which you wish.
Subliminal messaging has been used for various purposes. These subliminal messages can be used in an attempt to influence the viewer of the message without them knowing it. Many people will claim to see the subliminal messages in advertising and popular songs. Some people even believe the government uses subliminal messaging in order to control the public. Although a lot of these alleged subliminal messages simply aren't there or aren't intentional, there is a video from the 60s that seemed to have a very clear message hidden in it. Before modern TV, most television stations weren't on 24/7, so they would play a sign-off message before ending the station. Oftentimes, this sign-off would be the national anthem. Well, in 2009, a YouTuber named Naomi19631963 uploaded a television sign-off in the 1960s. According to the description, they got this clip off a film reel from a TV station that signed off with it. At first glance, the sign-off doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary. But if you look more closely, you can see a very subtle yet important detail. In between the transitioning of the lyrics on the screen, another message is being played. This can really only be seen if you slow it down enough. Take a look. Once slowed down, the message that plays is, "Trust the US government. God is real, God is watching. Believe in government God. Rebellion will not be tolerated. Obey, consume, obey, consume. Buy Ultra, buy Naomi.
Project MKUltra and MK Naomi.
Worship, consume, obey, believe. Do not question the government." This is a pretty unnerving discovery. The subliminal message is certainly there.
Why do the Illuminati insert their symbols in plain sight for all to see? What are their aims when they put so much symbolism in popular media? Traditionally, symbols are used to convey complex information in a very simple manner. No smoking signs, stop signs, etc. However, in the case of the Illuminati and other secret societies, it's not always so simple. In occult circles, all symbols have double meanings which allow them to be displayed in plain sight. Here's a passage from Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma.
Masonry, like all the religions, all the mysteries, Hermeticism and alchemy, conceals its secrets from all except the adepts and sages, or the elect, and uses false explanations and misinterpretations of its symbols to mislead those who deserve only to be misled, to conceal the truth, which it calls light, from them, and to draw them away from it.
Here's a list of possible reasons why the Illuminati is obsessed with smothering the media with their esoteric symbols, starting from the most malicious reasons to the least harmful. Programming. In this theory, research into the MK Ultra program has never stopped, and the Illuminati have been able to achieve high efficiency in programming mind-controlled victims via symbols inserted into popular media. Hypnotic triggers. Specific and pre-established symbols are inserted into the media in order to trigger hidden programs in Monarch, MK Ultra, and other mind-controlled victims. Psychic attack. The Illuminati use mass communication devices such as televisions, radios, and computers in order to broadcast negative energy on a massive scale. To lure. Symbols are inserted into the media in order to entice often unsuspecting viewers and lure them into the occult. To taunt. Some researchers believe that Illuminati uses symbols in order to taunt members of the public who have awakened to their game and make them appear crazy to non-believers. Territorial markings. Like a dog urinating on its territory or a rancher branding its cattle, the Illuminati brand its property by displaying its symbols.
So the deep state has three different levels. At first, you have the legislative branch and bureaucracy of spreading this ideology out on the world stage. Underneath that, you have the second level, which influences the first level. And so in that level, you have foreign governments, you have occult secret societies, your Skull and Bones, and etc. Then you also have your think tanks and all of those, and rich globalists that want to see their agenda make it to affect that first level. So that's the second level, and they're all influencing the first level. Underneath that is the spirit realm. So these people that are in the secret societies and occultists and want to see it put out on the first level, the world stage, they're going and they're doing these rituals, and we choose Bohemian Grove for that purpose because we don't have enough time to break down every secret society and their purposes and whatever. Ultimately, their goal is all the same. But at Bohemian Grove, it's like where the walls come down. That's where the ritual aspect of things come, and the third level of the deep state. So the third level is tapping into the spirit realm to be able to get your power and to be able to get your direction, and that influences the second level, and that influences the first level, and that's how it goes across the world scene to be enacted. Ultimately, Luciferianism, Satanism, these rituals to tap into the other side to get their direction. It's kind of like being a Christian. You know, God gives us certain guidelines in His book. It's our basic instructions before leaving Earth. It's our guidelines to be able to make it here, right? I mean, we're lost without that. And so He gives us certain criteria on how to pray, how to communicate, how to worship. He gave in the Old Testament very specifics about how to build the temple. You know, it's just one example. And so when you're dealing with the occult side of things, that's the opposite end of the spectrum. That's the occultists they're following just as diligently as a true believer of Christ follows Him, submits their life to Him, stays in the Word, does lives the Word, right? Just as that diligence is, they're just as diligent, but it's for the opposite side. So with the occult, you've got these practices that have been passed down for millennia. And these people that are in power today are still practicing the same things. They're still wanting to see this system come in so that they can have their final go at taking over this world, destroying Christianity. Ultimately, it's not against us. I mean, yes, it is against humanity, but ultimately it's against God.
We need to understand the force of darkness among us. And that force of darkness is the very government we have elected and empowered to impose the darkness upon us.
one from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother.
The more we understand it, the sooner we can be free from its shackles.
I'm going to show you something really interesting, and it's how the new corporate banking cartel governments of the world rely on and depend on our stupidity in order for them to get their assumed consent to operate over and above us. It's like a system where we become trustees or servants or slaves of their foreign banking cartel corporation. And what they say is that we are voluntary slaves, or voluntary servitude, they call it. And voluntary servitude is the agreement to act as a slave.
Everything we think we know is a lie.
Yeah. History, who we are, where we come from, our religions, our food, our medicine, what this world is, quite literally everything is a lie.
Lying lips are abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are his delight.
Do you notice that they have the same amount of ink on them? Do you notice that they're made out of the same virtually worthless stuff? It's paper. Did you get it? It's paper. When we create money, we have created an instrument of value that has no value of its own. And it's just as expensive or inexpensive to print the 20 as it is to print the 1. In January of 1913, in December of 1913, he signed the Federal Reserve Act, bringing the Federal Reserve System into place in America, and did what Thomas Jefferson said must never happen. He took the control of the money away from the people by taking it away from the Congress and gave it to a group of private individuals who have to pay taxes on the money they loan the government.
If 100 people go to the bank and all keep taking out £100, before the end of the day, the bank will close. It's very simple if people get to understand what's going on. And it will be good for them to know, because we need to stop this. We need to stop what they're doing to people, hurting people for no reason, put people in poverty.
And by they, we're talking about the parent corporation.
The parent corporation,
The
yes.
banks and governments and justice systems all working to penalize and harvest humanity.
Yeah, they're in bed together, everybody. They said, if they send you to the Citizens Advice Bureau, don't even bother to go, because they're working too with them. Everybody they have in their pocket. And it's very sad, because people will do things to other people for very little money.
And you are held as collateral to secure the debt which our government owes to international bankers. So you and me and all these people here are actually collateral, and we don't even own our lives. We are chattel, and we believe we're free.
And unfortunately, the moment you're born into this society, you're sort of brainwashed in order to, you need to take the following steps. You need to, first you get born, then you go to kindergarten, then you go to school, you spend 12 years at school, then you go to hopefully university, then you go to work. By then you're brainwashed. By then you're integrated into the society, you're doing exactly what the society expects you to do, to live as a citizen of the society and to be a slave to the workforce, to devote your entire life, to devote your entire time, away from your family, so that you can be out there to help people construct bigger and bigger buildings, bigger and bigger bridges, and better technology. But why? What for? I mean, what is there to really achieve?
So I'll show you how this ties in with you and how you ended up with a contract with the Vatican.
They have to interact with you as a fiction, because they're all corporations. Corporation cannot interact with real people. So they made a straw man. They call it a straw man because it has no soul and is spiritually dead.
Talk to us about the straw man. What exactly is the straw man?
The straw man is your name written in block letters. Very simple. It was done at birth. What the corporations, not governments, they took your birth certificate and made a second birth certificate with a trust, a Sisti QV trust. They made it in all block letters.
Okay, let's talk about the difference between your signature and your autograph.
Okay, a signature is under the UCC, which is the fiction, the straw man. Your autograph is the real person. So if you go up to a movie star and says, "Can I have your autograph?" You never say, "Can I have your signature?" It's always autograph because you have flesh and blood. Signature is what you're signing every time they can go into your account and take money.
And every time you do sign a piece of paper, you can bet that that signature of yours is being monetized, securitized.
It is. By the banks, by everybody that you, wherever you sign, credit cards, everything that you sign, they're getting funds off your trust fund from that birth certificate.
Okay, so fees and all sorts of things and invisible costs are being discharged against your birth bond in that sense?
Yes.
Without you ever knowing about it?
Without you ever knowing about it, yes. It was never disclosed to you. All the stuff is done without disclosing, and it's deception, it's fraud, and it's happening every day to everyone that's outside the inner circle.
You have to think about some of these things sometimes. Because a man is born, but he has the option of two births where he wants to dock his body through the dockmaster, which are the doctors who can, they can dock you into life and you're not dead until you've been docked out of life. But you have a choice of two births, the birth of the debtor and the birth of the creditor. That's your choice.
This is followed by an astronaut nailed to a cross, symbolizing the worship of scientism, which is currently the world's most popular religion. And finally, at the top of this mind control totem pole is the Roman eagle, Aquila, also known as the Roman standard. This eagle is a common everyday symbol, especially in America, and its presence represents the fact that the Roman Empire never fell. It just went into the shadows and clandestinely acquired more and more power until it ended up in control of everything that we know of today. The show's intro, with the eagle being at the top of the totem pole, alludes to the domination by the Romans of all things. Throughout the opening, we see all the religious mind control techniques of the past, mixed with the technological mind control techniques of today. Currently, the Holy Roman Empire rules the world through the Crown of England and the 3 city-states: London for finance, the Vatican for religion, and Washington, D.C., or the District of Columbia, for military. Most countries are controlled by the hidden Roman Empire because their leaders are loyal to it, or they've been bought off by its banksters and agents. Furthermore, most courts throughout the world operate under Roman law, aka civil law, canon law, maritime admiralty law, statute law, and commercial law. The United States of America, which is nothing more than a corporation and you're an employee, and United Kingdom are 2 of the many countries controlled by the Holy Roman Empire. On the back of the US dollar, we find the Roman eagle with the phrase E pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. This advertises their plan to slowly create a one-world rule out of the heavily fractured and divided system that we find ourselves in currently. Similar to the phrase ordo ab chao, which is Latin for order out of chaos. Besides US courthouses being completely Roman in the way they are designed, they also have the Roman eagles sitting on top of the flags in the courtrooms. Same thing with the flags that you see when the president is addressing the nation. The Statue of Liberty is a Roman goddess named Libertas, which was adopted by the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. Everything in America is Roman at heart, from how we have a Senate, a House of Representatives, stock market, huge sports events, even public parks and libraries. Do you remember the speech that JFK gave about secret societies?
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Well, the embodiment of what he was referring to is the Holy Roman Empire, the Jesuits, and black nobility, with black nobility being the most powerful. The black nobility is a network of extremely powerful families that date back as far as ancient Egypt or even earlier. They use any tactic necessary, including murder, fraud, genocide, terrorism, etc., to protect their wealth and keep the common man under financial slavery.
As the centuries passed and the 1700s came around, the black nobility set up strategic alliances with the Illuminati and the Freemasons. It was an unholy trinity that would use the Earth's population at their disposal to protect their interests. The black nobility were students of the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who believed that slavery was a necessary institution. Because some are born to rule and others to be ruled.
There's a Roman maximum in law that says, "For he that would be deceived, let him." Simply meaning, if you are so ignorant as to be deceived, then that's your business, that's your problem. So you need to do your homework and find out what the words mean, especially in relation to law and government, because there is a world of occultism that is operating today. You use certain words, and when those words are used in a court, they don't mean the same thing at all. Understanding law and the words of law, there are two things that this planet has: water and earth, water and land. Consequently, there are two kinds of law, the law of the land and the law of water. You need to understand the difference. The law of the land is the law of the culture that lives on the land. And so consequently, the law of the land is different in every country. You can do things in America you can't do in Russia. However, there is a higher law that dominates the entire world. It's called the law of the water. The law of water is referred to as the law of money. It doesn't matter what color you are, where you're from, or where you live. Money is money. And anytime you're doing banking or using money, you are now under the law of water, maritime admiralty. If you go back in history where all of this began, back in the land of Cana, and you probably have heard in the Bible, the land of Cana. The Canaanites were Phoenician bloodline, and in the ancient Phoenician language, Cana meant merchant, banker. The very word merchant comes from mer, M-E-R, for the sea, for water. As in mermaid, we have merchant. Merchant, bankers. Let me give you an example of the difference between the law of water and the law of the land. The Statue of Liberty must be put in water. It could not be put on American land as such. It had to be put in the harbor because it's not the Statue of Freedom. It's a Statue of Liberty. Liberty is what a sailor gets. When he pulls into port on a ship, he gets liberty. He's not free. So America is not the land of the free and the home of the brave. We're not free or brave, period. And make no mistake, they do not pick words by chance. These words are very serious.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God created the world with the Word. The Watchers, the fallen angels that were cast out of heaven by God, dominate and control this world by using hidden magical forces. Until you learn how magic is being used to control you, you will never know how the world really works.
For we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
One example is through the careful construction of the English language, designed and put together in a way that produces magical effects and can manipulate those who are unaware of the word's true meaning. A very handy tool for those who wish to control you.
Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Proverbs 18:21.
Here is a great example of how words are used to cast spells without us even being aware of it, by AmeRu-Ka. We awake each morning and go off during the weekdays to earn a living at various jobs and undertakings until we come to the weekend. This seems perfectly acceptable to most people, but remember that a wake is a social gathering associated with death held before a funeral. Mourning is a state you are in grief over someone's death, and you would have to be in a weekdays to earn a living, since urns are for the ashes of the dead. We call our jobs undertakings. The word also can mean the profession of funeral management. The word job is a Hebrew word for persecuted. We get the weak end of the deal as we become weakened ourselves. We are not taught this form of magic because it has been hidden from us by the kings and rulers of this world, from our past and our present.
I'll give you an example of how this law of the water works. Why is it that you have to go to court? You go to court because you play basketball and tennis on a court. How do you play tennis on a court? You play with a racket. Why? Because that's what it is. It's a racket. When you go into a court, what's the idea of going to court? It's a game, like basketball. The whole idea in a court, one team gets up and they throw the ball over to that team of lawyers. That team gets up and throws the ball back into their court. And the judge is wearing a black robe, so he is the referee. He doesn't care which side wins or loses because he's going to get paid anyway. So he couldn't care less. The judge is a referee between two teams. The judge rules from the bench. The word bench in Latin is a bank. Therefore, the judge rules for the bank. Where do you find banks? You find banks on both sides of a river. They're called river banks. And what does a river bank do? It directs the flow of the current, C. Consequently, your money is current, C, because it's the flow, the cash flow. I'll give you an example of how this works. When a ship pulls into a harbor, all ships are referred to as female. Why? There's a very good reason. Maritime Admiralty banking law says all ships are female because they're carrying items for money, and so consequently they are under Maritime Admiralty law. Admiralty is where we get the word admiral, admiral of the Navy. Let me give you an example of how this works. When a ship pulls into harbor, it parks at the dock. The captain has to provide for the port authorities a certificate of manifest, because yesterday the ship was not here. But this morning the ship pulled in, so it has manifested. So consequently all the products have manifested. So each one of those items coming off of that ship has come off of water. And consequently on a ship, all ships have a captain. The word captain comes from a Latin word capital, money. So the captain represents the money that's on board the ship. And as I said, the captain has to present to the port authorities a certificate of manifest for each and every item. How much does it weigh? What color is it? How many doors does it have? Etc. The ship is sitting in its berth. Wherever a ship sits when it docks is called its berth, berthing a ship. All the items, as I said, coming off that ship represent money. They came in on water. They are Maritime Admiralty products. Now, when you were born, your mother's water broke. And when your mother's water broke, you came out. And this is why you have to have a birth certificate, because you are a Maritime Admiralty product under international law. Your mother delivered you. This is why if you go to Sears and buy a refrigerator, they will ship it to you. They will deliver it. And that's why you were in your delivery room. Your mother was delivering a product. Maritime Admiralty. You came down your mother's birth canal. And once you, and as you're taking one of the televisions or the cars off the ship and it falls down and breaks, that's all right. Sometimes they're stillborn, so consequently you lost money on that one. Therefore you have to have a death certificate, and it's always signed by the dock. The dock has to sign your birth certificate and your death certificate. All of these words and terms are Maritime Admiralty banking words. And therefore, if you understand, lawyers and judges and courts and government are all under international Maritime Admiralty law. All religions, all churches in the world operate under maritime law. This is why all churches are divided into denominations. It's like 20s and 50s and 100s. This is why they're called denominations, because all churches are nothing more than the product of Maritime Admiralty banking. It's an extraordinary story of occult treason, high treason, and crimes against the state. So today, if you are asked, are you a citizen of the United States? What you think you're being asked is, are you lawfully in this country to do business? They didn't ask you if you were in America lawfully. They asked you a specific question. Are you, of your own volition, out of your own mouth, testifying that you are a citizen of the United States? Because in that way, citizen of the United States means you are an employee of a foreign corporation operating on international maritime law. So today, the President of the United States is the President of a privately owned company. The company is called United States. And the word president is always a word that is used in corporate law. Banks have presidents. All companies have presidents. So there's a corporation called United States, privately owned, and it has a president. Privately owned, out of England. And you need to understand words and terms, because I believe that there is a divine presence in the universe that men call God, and one day that divine presence is going to move on the earth and we're going to see freedom come back to this world. And when it does, you're going to need to understand words and terms and how they have been used to trick you. These words have been used to enslave you.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Ah, the government. It loves you and wants to keep you safe and well. It even wants to make paying taxes, fines, and court costs easier for you. How? Well, you'll need to meet your straw man. He was born the same day you were. He looks like you, has the same name, and lives in your house, but you never knew he existed. You will have even paid his parking tickets or taxes. The worst part? He's been dead from day one. From every birth certificate, a legal personality, or legal fiction, is created with the same name to confuse little old you into thinking it's you. So, there is a human you and a paper you, or as it's commonly known, a straw man. So when it seems like government officials, court clerks, or the police are speaking English, they aren't. They're speaking legalese, designed to make you agree to verbal and written contracts without even knowing about it, all spawned from Black's Law Dictionary. For example, when the police say, "Do you understand?" you'll say, "Yes." What they are really saying is, "Do you stand under our authority?" Oops-a-daisy, you just created a verbal contract with them. Oh, you clever government. Did you know that whenever you register something, you are handing over title to the person you register it with? That's right. Whenever you register something with the government, they assume it belongs to them. Registered your car? Super! Now you are the registered keeper of your vehicle, and the government can crush it when you don't pay your, straw man's taxes. Expecting a new bundle of joy? Well then you need to register your little darling with a birth certificate. Then they can start the process all over again and create a new straw man for your little one. Isn't that great? So when Junior grows up, he'll be able to generate revenue just like you have. When you notify on your baby by signing the birth certificate, your child becomes a ward of state. And if the government doesn't like what you're doing, they'll assume it's okay to take the child away or make new rules for things they don't like. Not enough school? Smacking your child? Shouting too loudly? Then it's off to social services for the little one. When you get a bill, it's sent to you, but belongs to your straw man, not you. That's why bills, fines, and summons start with Mr., Mrs., or Ms. Sometimes you'll see your surname in capitals, just like on a gravestone. That's because your straw man is dead, and just a silly piece of paper, created before you could comprehend or even consent to it. When you go to court, you represent your straw man, so you, the human, take on any costs, fees, taxes, and fines involved for the straw man. The human you doesn't even need to pay them. But you made a contract with the court by appearing on behalf of your legal personality or straw man, just like the government knew you would. Confused? Well, don't worry. The government doesn't want you to know anyway. If you knew, you'd stop paying things like council tax and parking tickets. Because when you go to court, you are representing your straw man. You are you, alive and made of flesh and blood. Your straw man or legal personality is a piece of paper created from your birth certificate. And you think it's you. What a silly Billy.
This is a certified true copy of my live statement of birth. You can get this by applying for it at the Registrar General. They'll give it to you. And it's very interesting because this is where it all began. This is the foundation document. All identification is generated from this document. And so if the foundation document is no good, anything that's made from it is no good. That means driver's licenses, health cards, everything. Now what they did here, this is exactly what he meant when he said, soon every American will be required to register their biological property. Now your parents didn't realize what they were doing when they filled this out, and these didn't exist before 1933. Birth records were recorded in scripture, and these only came into being in 1933 when they hatched this plan. They created a corporate fiction with a name just like yours. In doing this, they registered and monetized the spirit and soul of a living being. This denotes ownership. And when your parents were tricked into filling this out, they allowed your spirit and your soul to be monetized. And futures were sold on you. Now, this is my birth certificate. This is actually a share.
From my understanding, you can get anywhere between $30,000 and $7 million.
$7 million? Does this depend on who you are?
It depends on who you are, and it depends how much you spend. So basically, this right here is not a certificate of birth. You are the certificate of birth. You're alive. You're a living being thing.
Aw, thank you.
You're welcome. This is essentially a separation of you, Lucy Blihar, the living being thing, from
the mammal.
You, Lucy Blihar,
The data.
capital entity, money spending data within our system.
So it's basically like when you download an app and you just click through all the terms and conditions without reading it. Like that's what happens when we're given a birth certificate as an infant.
Yeah, our parents hand over us, they take our handprints, they take our footprints, they take our weight, and then they say, here's your birth certificate, look, you had a child. And our parents are like, wow, we had a child, look at our birth certificate. But really, they have the child. That's all you need is the child.
But now like the child can be tracked for life.
Yeah, it's a trick. It's a trick. And there's a term called a straw man that I think we should probably define.
Okay, tell me more about that. That sounds a little bit creepy.
So here's a picture of a straw man.
I don't like it.
I don't like
Hate
it either. Basically, a straw man is the corporate definition of you as a person. So basically, we as human beings, as living, breathing, real flesh and blood human beings, we have a ton of value. But under common law, which is basic laws under the original Constitution, we are not allowed to be tried in a system as a living, breathing thing. So the government said, we need to find a way to get around this. So we need to trick everyone into thinking that they are separate from what they really are.
So a birth certificate is a loophole?
A birth certificate is kind of a loophole.
In common law.
In common law. Yeah, and we all just sort of fall for it because they use the same name. But what they aren't doing is they're not actually using the same name because it's in all capital letters. And that's why there's an emphasis on capital letters, and capital means money. So all proper nouns typically have the first letter of the word capitalized. If you get any document from the government, it's gonna have your name in all capitals because it's a different version of you. And so you see your name and then you fall for it because you say, oh, it's in all caps, this must be serious. But really, they're kind of giving you a hint like, hey, pay attention, this isn't actually you.
So if I exist separately from the entity that the government created of me, does that mean that I don't have to pay taxes?
I think it does. And I think it also means that any taxes you did pay, you can get back. So this straw man birth certificate, Lucy Blihar, is the only thing that can be taxed. It's against common law to view you as a living thing as a taxable entity.
So the one with capital letters, the Lucy Blihar with capital letters, is the only one who can be taxed?
Yeah.
Then next year she can pay her own taxes. I'm not paying them.
And she's not even real.
Okay, so not paying taxes is great, but if we opt out of the system, does that mean we can no longer vote? Like we can no longer rent property or buy property? Like, is it kind of a pay-to-play situation?
So I think what happened was this creation of us as legal entities made our government more of a banking government rather than a people's government. So you're right in the sense you wouldn't be able to get credit. I don't think you'd be able to vote, but you would still be able to participate in private business. So essentially anyone who wants your money, you could give it to them. So let's say you take your birth certificate back and you get $3 million. Now you're sitting on $3 million. You can go to Montana, you can find a farmer and say, hey, I want to buy your land. You can get their land. But yeah, you probably can't get loans because that's the banking system.
Yeah, you probably can't have a credit card. Okay, so are there people who have done this and what are they doing now?
Yeah, there are people who have done this. Yesterday I found a 2,000-page book on how to completely leave the system and reclaim your live birth. I have seen plentiful YouTube videos of people winning court cases by claiming that they're still alive. There's a video of this guy. I'm not sure what he's tried for. Again, you can't break common law. Common law is like, don't kill people, don't steal something that's definitely not yours. That's all still illegal.
Makes sense.
These banking corporate laws, supposedly you can break. So there's this guy in court and he's being tried, and that he's being very patient with the judge. And every time she says something, he's like, well, actually, you can't say that because I'm alive. I'm a living being entity, part of the universe. I'm not a corporation. I'm not a corpse. I'm not dead. Eventually, she's so flustered, and you can kind of feel that she's like aware that he's onto something, that she leaves the courtroom. She's like, give me a minute, I'll be right back. And she leaves. And when she leaves, he's like, okay, the session is over. If the judge leaves the courtroom, that means that it's closed, and he and his whole team get to leave. And there's other videos of this. Like there's a guy filming inside of a government building, and a security guard and a policeman come up to him and they start saying he's breaking the law, he's breaking the law. And he's like, no, you guys are only policy enforcers. The law doesn't apply to me because I'm still alive. I've sold my live birth and I'm no longer part of your system, so you can only be a policymaker. And then they're like, okay, well, the policy of the building is that you can't film in here. And it's really interesting because I'm solely going off of these people's expressions, but it really looks to me like they know that what he's saying is true. To tell you the truth, from what I've learned, I think it would be a lot more work to do this, and you'd have to really be prepared for every single conversation. And I think a lot of police officers and people you run into wouldn't even know the truth. So you'd end up going to court a lot. You might end up going to jail a lot. You'd theoretically be able to get out of it every time, but it might be easier to just go to work with your briefcase and your star. Yeah.
Okay, I'm convinced that this is a real thing you can do, but personally, it seems like a little too much of a hassle. I like my apartment. I like traveling on airplanes, so it's not the move for me.
It's not the move for me yet, but it might be the move. I need to do more research.
On
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York. While in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-Tech, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her, and her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11.
If the history of America is so young as compared to the rest of the world, the more I continued to research this subject, it eventually became clear, was staring me right in the face, that the same architecture was found all over America. So we all began looking into our past for old construction photos and evidence to support the mainstream narrative. And what we have found is very little to support these claims, seeming pretty clear that there was a past civilization on this continent before our people arrive on the scene. And recently I was watching a video on the inception of Las Vegas, and even the story as they told it was supposed to be crude buildings and tents and makeshift hotels. And yet when you looked at the background in these pictures, you already had glorious buildings in the style of the old world with the quality and craftsmanship not expected of old cowboys. So here I just wanted to take a little tour of Capitol buildings of America. And Capitol buildings are a good example because oftentimes some of the most glorious buildings are designated as Capitol buildings. And typically always having this same style, with a dome in the center and a grand entryway. And so here we begin with Alabama, constructed in 1851. A true wonder. 1851. And again, we have discussed the means of the people of 1851 and how such construction for people of this time would even be possible. And here we have the Alaska state capital. Just a little glimpse at it, seeming to be marble columns and a very easy repurposing. A handful of stick-on letters. And here the Arizona state capital. Very ornate. We can see a little dome back here and some old world tech on either side. And very interesting. Completed in the year of 1900. And here we have Arkansas, the Arkansas state capital, completed in 1915. And here the California state capital, completed in 1874. Arriving on horse to mine for gold, and within 25 years, inconceivable to consider these people building this. A golden dome, absolutely amazing, overlooking the Rocky Mountains, located in Colorado, completed in 1894. And mind you, the population of all of these states at the time, so minuscule in comparison to present time, the means to construct are just not available yet. The ability to do everything, even heating and cooling. Even in modern times, we see a window fan here. That's another issue. 1894, no cranes, maybe electricity, just arriving on the scene, perhaps for 10 years. And why wouldn't people build something a little more practical, a little more suited for the times? It doesn't make sense to do the most difficult thing at the most difficult time. What is this, a glass ball on top? Absolutely mind-blowing. In the late 1800s, there's snow on the ground half of the year, and realistically, impossible. And this has nothing to do with hard work and the determination of people in that time period. Connecticut, 1879, just an absolute mind-blower, very castle-like and ridiculous. Georgia, 1889, looks like a gold domer. Idaho, 1912. Idaho, most known for its potatoes, of course. And this was the choice for a state capital in 1912. Illinois, 1888. Illinois, of course, having no shortage of glorious buildings, and unlike the amazing World's Fairs that they put out and eventually demolished the buildings, this beauty is absolutely permanent and essentially in the same style. 1888. And again in 1888, right next door, we have the Indiana State House capital. So at the very same time, in the same year, just due south of Illinois, Indiana is constructing a very similar work of wonder. And here is the Iowa State Capitol, one of my favorites, the only 5-domed capital in the nation. This dome made of gold and absolutely over the top for a state most known for their excellent corn, 1886. And here we have the Kansas State Capitol, and perhaps this is where the Wizard of Oz resides. And Kentucky, 1910, appears to have a concrete dome, and in fact the whole thing seems to be cast of concrete. Very beautiful. And Louisiana, in 1932, at 350 feet, this baby resembling the Nebraska Capitol building. And here in Maine, in 1832, very early time period, very busy in Maine. 1797 in Maryland, rather modest, made of brick, but again a very early time period, less than 25 years after the inception of this nation. In Massachusetts in 1779, again our nation is created in 1776, this is 1779. George Washington would have been around, probably visited this baby, if we're to believe this silly story. And here we go. This would have been one of the first glorious buildings built in our fine nation. And a complete joke with the means of the time. This is completely over the top. A people do not start out a nation in this fragile and early time period with buildings like this. 1879 Michigan. Very interesting. The narrow type dome, and not one or two or even 3 stories would suffice, but in 1879 they needed 4 stories, plus all this on top. Minnesota, 1905, one of my favorite domes, and again clearly a cast concrete. Mississippi, 1903, Missouri, 1918, and Montana, 1902. Montana, way up there. 1902 Montana, probably not much more than cowboys, and this is the capital of choice. And here the Nebraska state capitol, sitting at 400 feet with what appears to be a copper dome, 1932. And Nevada in 1871. I was recently watching a video on Nevada and especially Las Vegas and how they had to set up tents as hotels and saloons, and yet in the background of the photos we could see beautiful buildings and block work that completely was contrary to the narrative that they were giving us. 1871, the Old West. New Hampshire, 1819, very early time period, a lot of gold, very intricate. And New Jersey in 1792, again, golden domes, very weathered, 1792. And the New York State Capitol, 1899, really looking like a parliamentary building. I actually wasn't expecting this. Looking very royal and similar to all these Capitol buildings, very un-American. And here we are in Oklahoma, a massive, what seems like a Native American statue on top, and again seeming to be cast concrete. And here in Pennsylvania in 1906, very impressive dome. Not sure what the covering...
Not just the Capitol, but the geographical layout of the whole of Washington, D.C. was carefully designed, and the Capitol itself is just one component. Take a look at this photo and notice its relation to the Washington Monument, one of the most famous obelisks in the world. Notice how similar this is to the Vatican's layout. This exact same layout can be found in Paris also, and many other cities. Why this configuration? The key to this is perhaps the dome, which dominates these buildings. In many ancient cultures, the dome shape represented the female principle or the womb. When you have the male principle, which is the obelisk, connected to the female principle, it was believed by occultists that a third entity, a kind of spiritual energy, is produced. We've already seen that idea in the square and compass logo. In occultism, the idea is also quite prevalent that certain shapes and colours either create or diffuse energies. We're quite familiar with this concept today in the form of Feng Shui, which was a craze a while ago. Arranging your furniture in relation to what they do with energies to create balance. You can think of this kind of arrangement between the obelisk and the dome as a kind of feng shui designed to generate a spiritual power. The whole setup of the Capitol, dome and obelisk is present in the Masonic Washington and in the Catholic Vatican. Now this would seem odd for two seemingly opposed ideologies to do this, but then we remember Alice A. Bailey's pronouncement. There is no question, therefore, that the work to be done in familiarizing the general public with the nature of the mysteries is of paramount importance at this time. These mysteries will be restored to outer expression through the medium of the Church and the Masonic fraternity. Bailey predicted that the mystery religion would start to become familiar to the general public through both the Church, meaning the false Church, and the Masonic fraternity. This two-pronged attack appear to be on opposing sides but are working towards the same end. Remember that the founder of the Illuminated Masons, Adam Weishaupt, had actually come from the Catholic Jesuit order, but after creating the Masonic Illuminati, he claimed to be anti-Catholic. The Masons and Church appear to be opposed, but in fact are both puppets of Satan.
It's very clear that throughout almost every nation we see this structure like we see in Washington, D.C., where the builders have refused the cornerstone of the Messiah. They've replaced it with the stone of Baal.
At the top of the Capitol dome we find this statue, who symbolically faces east towards the sunrise. This is the goddess of reason who the French enthroned at Notre Dame, or as we've come to know her since the beginning of this study, Ashura or Ashtoreth. She pops up absolutely everywhere. This particular idol was designed by a Freemason, Thomas Crawford, and is standing on top of it almost certainly represents the earth, around which is written in Latin, E pluribus unum. This means, out of many, one. Now remember, there's always a light side and dark side to every symbol, so the lighter good meaning for public consumption is calling for the unity of the American people, which was made up of immigrants. The dark hidden meaning is that the whole world will be united under the feet of this enigmatic goddess. The American form of Asherah is mostly known as Columbia. The DC in Washington DC actually stands for Washington District of Columbia, so effectively it's like saying that it's her district, her territory where she rules.
Ashtaroth coming forth in the shape of a foul angel, sitting upon an infernal dragon, and carrying on his right hand a viper, who also claimed to rule 40 legions. He is a demon of the first hierarchy, who seduces by means of laziness, and of course, rationalized philosophies. To others, he teaches mathematical sciences and handicrafts, and lead them to hidden treasures.
And moved across continents until it was hidden by America's founding fathers, who left clues to the treasure's location right before our eyes.
He was also said to give mortal beings the power over serpents. Ashtaroth is depicted as an unclothed man with feathered wings, wearing a crown, holding a serpent in one hand, and riding a beast with dragon-like wings and a serpent's tail.
AmeRu, the land of AmeRu, or the Plumed Serpent. You're in the land of the Plumed Serpent. You understand? In the land of Quetzalcoatl. And who is Quetzalcoatl? Alright, so we're in this book. It's called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And it says here, the red children of the sun, writes James Morgan Creasy, do not worship the one God. For them, that one God is absolutely impersonal, and all of the forces emanated from that one God are personal. This is the exact reverse of the popular Western conception of a personal God and personal work and forces of nature. Decide for yourself which of these beliefs is the more philosophical. These children of the sun adore the plumed serpent. They adore the plumed serpent, really. Who is the messenger of the sun? The messenger of the sun. He was the god Quetzalcoatl. Alright, so the plumed serpent is Quetzalcoatl, right? We just got that before. Alright, the AmeRu is the plumed serpent, so the plumed serpent is Quetzalcoatl, so we talked about the same thing. In Mexico, Gucumatz and Quiche, same person. And in Peru, he was called AmeRu. He was called AmeRu, Quetzalcoatl. From the latter name comes our word America. From this AmeRu, Amara, remember? The land of AmaRu-Ka. AmeRu-Ka is literally translated land of the plumed serpent. AmeRu-Ka is the land of the plumed serpent.
I was on vacation in Scotland when I got a call from my friend, Alan Butler. He and I have investigated many mysteries together. He told me there is a serpent-shaped mound here at a place called Loch Nell. Serpent mounds are rare. Of the 3 largest known to exist, 1 is in the US and 2 are in Europe, which begs the question, is there a connection between the people who built the mound in Scotland and the one in America? All of the sites have a sacred purpose and are best seen from above. What's more, there is evidence that they were aligned with the heavens. But why? Evidence like this, left at the mounds, could be the key to unlocking a global system of shared knowledge and ideas. A link between cultures that reaches further back in time than our history books tell us today. If it can be proven that a group of pagan worshippers, their rituals and their symbols came from Scotland to America thousands of years ago, that would open up a whole new chapter in American history. Jim tells me that 1,000 years ago, this entire area used to be covered with hundreds of mounds. And not just bear mounds, but serpent mounds too. Even though they've now been destroyed, the fact they existed during that time could mean they were tied to a ritualistic, religious group centered around a figure called the Plumed Serpent. In America, the Plumed Serpent religion was widespread, but their trade empire went far beyond our country's borders, to Mexico and possibly to Europe. Jim says Cahokia was also a central hub for the Plumed Serpent religion, a belief that stretched all the way south into Mexico. Some experts believe the Plumed Serpent religion connects this Iowa effigy mound site with Cahokia. In fact, serpent-shaped artifacts have been found there. Any serpent connection is important in my search for the truth. I want to find out whether ancient cultures, possibly from Europe, traveled to the United States and shared knowledge with Native Americans.
We have evidence now that Native Americans that were here, not all of them, but by large, they had secret societies that were literally ancient forms of Freemasonry within their Native American tribes. satanic rituals, blood rituals. We even have evidence of underground kivas, temples.
I think where we could start is in the oral tradition of the tribes. Every one of the people from the tribe will tell you is that their ancestors were not the ones who built these mounds, that these mounds were here long before any tribes had migrated into those regions of the land. It's interesting to note that the Allegheny are the ones who built the Serpent Mound. Allegheny is the name of a giant tribe. That whole region was named the Allegheny, but in the oral tradition, the Allegheny were giants that inhabited that entire region. They were anywhere from 7 foot to 9 foot tall. There was a time when there was both societies living together, both regular sized people and the Allegheny, the giant people. The societal structure was with the giants being the rulers.
My question is, were they worshiping something bigger?
There were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown.
Here's what's going on here now. There's an American dragon. I'm going to show you that in a minute. It's extremely well articulated. There's no question in my mind. Let's look at this dragon. Now, this is apparently from some of their glyphs. And look at the plumage. Here's what I want you to look at. The plumage, the shapes. See these little circular things in the front here? Remember that.
Now, when we get into Ephesians and we understand what spiritual warfare looks like, Paul tells us we're not wrestling with flesh and blood. We're actually wrestling with principalities. Okay, these are fallen angel entities over nations, over land, over different areas. These are the things that affect what goes on underneath.
Remember this type of architecture? See these kind of little fluty looking things? Just keep in mind. You see this? See those flutes?
These are fallen, by the way. These are not good entities. These are the higher entities that are in league with Satan. So when you consider that we are living on a land, a massive land in the Western Hemisphere, that the ancients all prophesied was going to be the land that was going to lead the world into a worldwide global democracy that was going to be a beacon of light, bringing about all the old religions and schools of the world. That really makes more sense now that we understand that our nation has been revering and worshiping Lucifer. I believe that the plumed serpent god is literally Satan himself.
All right, remember I said remember those little fluty things? See that little structures, these structures here? That is not normal weathering or any form of geological formation. It's not. Look at that. It goes just all the way down here. And it chokes off right here. And then it continues down this way. Again, you look for pattern distinction. So I look for here, and it's just a sort of whitish, and I see this area here, all the way up from Washington, D.C., all the way around this circle, and then around this way. And then all of a sudden I look and I say, holy smokes, that looks like a dragon's head.
Long before the Native Americans got here, they inherited these things from the giants that were here before them, the advanced civilizations.
These are not fake lines here. Those are actually lines in the landscape right here in North America. Now, why are those straight lines like that in perfect rows? It comes over to here, and you take an abrupt transition from here to there. Now, what is that? Greg Morrison did some research over here. I discovered this anomaly, and Greg went and researched. And what you are looking at right there, I believe, is a feather. You're going to say, oh, how could that be? This is all kinds of crazy big things. Well, let's take a look at what a feather does look like. Remember this pattern, the ridge and then the little swishes. And they go down. I mean, they're all over the place here. It's not just there. They are all over. See? I'm not just talking one here and there. No. So let's go back to where we have our lines and where we have all our little ridges. Now, let's look up above and see what these lines and ridges look like. And I said they look pretty damn close. And what we're seeing there is the same little fluty looking things coming down off of the ridge lines. And that is right in the midst of a feather right here. That's a turkey feather. Okay, so, how could a feather be this big? How could a feather be that? I mean, it's just absolutely gigantic. Well, let's see, is it a part? What else is it a part of? Well, it happens to be part of the feathered serpent. And then I continue on, and I look up here, and that looks like some kind of feathered plumage coming off of that dragon's head. I mean, it is what it is. It's that same fluty looking stuff. And after that, there is none. There's none, you see? There's none. So it comes out to here, there's that fluty plumage sticking right off of the dragon's head. It's coming right out of the dragon's head in Little Rock. Strange. Strange place. All right, now, what else do we see here? We see another pattern break. I say that's the dragon's nose right there, and that's his head snaking up over this way, and that's the flutiness, whether it laid back this way and just fell this way, I don't know. But I'm looking at all of these patterns, and then I'm looking at some of these rivers and so forth, because he has to breathe, he has to eat, and he has these kind of things, just like the other one in Morocco, just like the other one in Morocco. So I looked down and I said, wow, look at those little crazy things. What is all that about? Look at these swishes and swishes and circles all around here, bordering what I think is his head. And maybe there's, I don't know what there, but that's not normal. And it runs all the way on that dragon's nose, all the way down to it. I mean, this is, I don't know what else to say. It is what it is. You don't see that. You don't see that anywhere else. But it runs all the way down at that dragon's nose. All of this, if you could look at this and understand what you see, and I do now, that is the flutiness of the feathers. You see, all the way coming back to here. That's not anything accidental. That is the feathered serpent pattern.
In Ezekiel 38, the chief prince of Meshishan-Tubal is Gog. We have the same entity, and when we can make this identification, it's going to open up Daniel 11, which is about the willful king that yet look forward to a future time when there will be a final beast rise from the sea in Revelation 13. The same is true in Ezekiel 38 with Gog. Gog is prophesied to return, and at the same time, Gog is a spiritual, dark entity, and we're going to be looking at the historical Gog, or Gyges, from the 7th century BC. The very name Gog, it's amazing, but this is what you would call the Tartarian warlords. You would call him Gog, very respectfully. When the restrainer is removed, and in Enoch 56:5, it says, "And in those days the angels shall return." They're gonna come back and hurl themselves to the east upon the Parthians and Medes, and they shall stir up the kings, so that a spirit of unrest shall come upon them, and they shall rouse them from their thrones, that they may break forth as lions from their lairs, as hungry wolves among their flocks. In Ezekiel 38:4, "And I will turn thee back, and put hooks in thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords." Now, does that language sound familiar to any of you Bible readers? I will put hooks into thy jaws. And this is the exact language that we see in the book of Job describing Leviathan. In Job 41, verse 1 and 2, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with the hook, or his tongue with the cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put an hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn?" And evidently, Gog was an entity that was able to inhabit Leviathan, just like we see Satan inhabiting the serpent.
In the end times, there would be a great nation that was going to rise up in the Western Hemisphere. It's going to take its rightful place as the beacon of light that was going to rule the world. It was going to bring about a philosophic empire, a one-world philosophic empire, and it was going to be utilizing the creeds and the beliefs of the old pagan world. AmaRu-Ka literally translates over the land of the plumed serpent.
Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth.
If you're still here, you may be wondering, is there anything that's the truth? A simple answer? Yes. A detailed answer? That's another level of deprogramming. Another video for another day. But I'll leave you with some hope that I didn't have when I learned the truth. You can know the truth, and if you believe the truth, He can set you free. For Abba so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whosoever believes in Him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32.
Yahushua saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. We must recognize what he's saying here. This is a type of parable, a statement or teaching for those who have been given eyes to see and who have understanding in his word. Did you know that the way in the scriptures is defined as Blessed are the undefiled in the way, who walk in the Torah of Yahweh. How about the truth? Your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and your Torah is the truth. Lastly, the life. And he said unto them, Set your hearts unto all the words which I testify among you this day, which ye shall command your children to observe to do, all of the words of this Torah, for it is not a vain thing for you, because it is your life.
You have to think about some of these things sometimes. I mean, they can dock you into life, you've been docked out of life. Because a man is born, but he has the option of two births where he wants to dock his body. Choice of two births. The birth of the debtor and the birth of the creditor. That's your choice.
But if the wicked will turn from all his sins that he hath committed, and keep all my statutes, and do that which is lawful and right, he shall surely live, he shall not die.
And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live.